That night, sleep was a stranger. I sat in the floral armchair in the dark, the grandfather clock ticking away the seconds of my new, unwelcome reality. The pain of Daniel's betrayal was a raw, physical wound, but the cold clarity that had settled over me was like a shield. It did not numb the ache, but it prevented it from shattering me. To understand the depth of that day's wound, you have to understand the promise it broke. A promise made to the only man I ever loved, whispered in a room that smelled of sickness and fading sunlight. A promise that had become the very foundation of my life for the last 10 years. My husband, Robert Gray, was not a man of grand gestures or eloquent words. He was a man of calloused hands and a quiet, steady heart. He was a carpenter, a master of his craft, and his workshop behind our small house was his sanctuary. It smelled of sawdust and varnish, a scent I still associate with safety and love. We built our life together from nothing, two young kids with more dreams than dollars, in a small town in Ohio where everyone knew your name. We weren't rich, not by a long shot. Our furniture was second-hand, our vacations were camping trips by the lake, and a night out was a shared basket of fries at the local diner. But we had a wealth that couldn't be counted in a bank. We had each other. Robert believed in the tangible, in things you could build and hold. He built the bookshelf in our living room, the cradle our daughter Eleanor slept in, the sturdy kitchen table where we shared thousands of meals. He used to say, "Anything worth having, Marge, is built with honest work and a true heart." That was his gospel. Our daughter Eleanor was our sunshine. She had Robert's steady hands and my hopeful heart. She grew up bright and kind, and when she fell in love with a good, hard-working boy from the next town over, we were overjoyed. Their marriage was a happy one, and a year later, Daniel was born. Holding him for the first time, I saw a perfect blend of our past and future in his tiny, scrunched-up face. Robert was utterly besotted. That big, strong carpenter would melt into a puddle at the sound of his grandson's giggle. He spent hours in his workshop, carving tiny wooden animals for Daniel, each one a small, perfect token of his love. Then, when Daniel was only 5, the unthinkable happened. A patch of black ice on a winter road, a swerving truck, and our Eleanor and her husband were gone. The light of our lives was extinguished in an instant. The grief was a physical force, a wave that threatened to pull us under. For weeks, the world was gray and silent. But in the midst of that suffocating darkness, there was a small, 5-year-old hand that would slip into ours. Daniel. He became our reason to breathe, our anchor in the storm. We raised him as our own. Our little house, once quiet, was filled again with the sound of cartoons and the pitter-patter of small feet. He was a good boy, a sweet and loving child who had his mother's smile. He was our second chance at parenthood, a living, breathing piece of the daughter we had lost. We poured all our love, all our hopes, into him. Robert taught him how to build things, how to be decent and kind. I taught him how to bake, how to be resilient. We weren't just his grandparents, we were his world, and he was ours. The years were kind to us, for a while. Daniel grew, and our love for him deepened. But life has a cruel way of balancing the books. When Daniel was in his last year of high school, the cough Robert had been ignoring for months turned into something we could no longer deny. Lung cancer? The diagnosis came down like a judge's gavel. It was aggressive, they said, inoperable. The final months were a blur of hospital visits and whispered conversations. Robert, my strong, capable Robert, withered before my eyes. But his spirit, his quiet dignity, never faltered. It was in his last week, in that sterile, beige hospital room, that he laid out the future for me. His hand, once so strong, was a fragile bird in mine. His voice was a rasp, a mere shadow of its former strength, but his eyes were as clear and true as ever. "Marge," he whispered, pulling me closer. "We didn't save much, but the house is paid off. The workshop, it's worth a bit. My pension, it's enough for you to be comfortable. Don't talk like that, Robert," I pleaded, my tears falling onto our joined hands. "We'll manage." He gave a weak shake of his head. A small, sad smile touched his lips. "No, my love, it's okay. I've lived a good life. A life with you and Eleanor, and with our boy." His gaze shifted to a picture of Daniel on the bedside table. "That boy, Marge, he's smart. He's got his mother's brains. He could do anything, be anyone. He deserves more than this small town, more than a life of just getting by." He squeezed my hand, his gaze locking with mine, fierce and desperate. "This is what I want you to do. This is my last wish. Promise me." "Anything, Robert," I sobbed. "Sell the workshop. Sell whatever you have to. Take all our savings, everything we built together, and give it to him. Give him a future, Marge. The kind of future we only ever dreamed of. A university education, a chance to see the world. Don't let him be held back by money, not like we were. Our future, it's in that boy now. Promise me you'll give it to him." "I promise, Robert," I said, the words tearing from my soul. "I promise." He sank back into the pillows, a look of peace finally settling on his tired face. "Good," he breathed. "That's my good girl." He died 2 days later, holding my hand, and his promise became my purpose. It was not a burden, it was a sacred trust, a way to keep a piece of Robert alive. The day after his funeral, I started making the arrangements. I sold his workshop, the sanctuary filled with his scent and his soul. Each tool, each piece of lumber felt like a piece of him, but I sold it. I sold the small collection of jewelry he had given me over the years, my pearl earrings, the gold locket. I took out a reverse mortgage on our house, the home we had built together, turning its equity into liquid cash. I funneled every last penny into a savings account I named the Daniel Fund. My friends thought I was crazy. "Margaret, you need that money for your old age," Mrs. Gable had warned. "What if you get sick?" But they didn't understand. This wasn't about money. It was about honoring Robert. It was about love. When Daniel was accepted into the prestigious university out of state, the pride I felt was blinding. The tuition was astronomical, a figure that made me physically dizzy. But I looked at the balance in the Daniel Fund, the sum of Robert's life's work and my own sacrifices, and I paid it without a second thought. I found him a nice, clean apartment near the campus, nothing fancy, but safe and comfortable. I paid his rent, his utilities, his grocery bills. I wanted him to focus on his studies, to thrive without the worries that had plagued Robert and me our whole lives. And for a while, it was wonderful. He would call me every Sunday, his voice full of excitement about his classes, his professors, his new friends. He was grateful, so incredibly grateful. "I won't let you or Grandpa down, Gram," he would say. "I'm going to make you proud." And I was. I was prouder than I had ever been. I was living my new life through him, a life of opportunity and promise. And I told myself that Robert was watching, and he was proud too. I was keeping his promise. I was building a future. I just never imagined it wouldn't be a future that included me. The change in Daniel began subtly, a slight shift in the tone of his Sunday calls during his second year. The initial excitement about his studies was replaced by a new, more worldly weariness. His conversations, once filled with anecdotes about lectures and library sessions, were now peppered with names of expensive restaurants, exclusive clubs, and a name that came up more and more frequently: Chloe. "Chloe says that the connections you make here are more important than the grades you get," he told me one afternoon. She's amazing, Graham. Her family is very influential. She knows everyone. I tried to be happy for him. It was natural for him to make new friends, to fall in love. She sounds lovely, dear, I said, a knot of unease tightening in my chest. When do I get to meet this wonderful girl? Soon, Graham, soon, he'd say evasively. She's just really busy with her charities and events. Then the requests started. They were small at first. Graham, could you send a little extra this month? I need a new suit. Chloe's taking me to a gallery opening. I sent the money. Graham, my laptop is so old it's embarrassing. Everyone else has the latest model. I dipped into what was left of Robert's pension and bought him a new one. Each request was wrapped in the language of necessity, of fitting into a world I had desperately wanted for him. I told myself it was part of the investment, part of Robert's promise. The real shift came a few months later. He called on a Tuesday, his voice strained. Graham, we need to talk about my apartment. Is something wrong with it? I asked, my mind immediately going to leaky pipes or a broken heater. No, it's fine. It's a student apartment, Graham. It's small. Chloe, she doesn't feel comfortable here. Her friends live in these beautiful high-rise buildings downtown with doormen and gyms. It's a different world. But Daniel, I said gently, that's a world we can't afford. Your apartment is safe and clean and it's all I can manage. I know, Graham. I know you're doing your best, he said, and the condescension in his tone was a small, sharp sting. But Chloe found this amazing place. It's a condo, actually. It's perfect. It has a view of the city, and it's in a much better neighborhood. It would be an investment, really. An investment. The word sounded foreign and cold. Daniel, an investment requires money we don't have. The fund is nearly empty. There's only the money from the reverse mortgage left, and that has to last for your final 2 years of tuition. But that's the thing, Graham, he said, his voice suddenly full of artificial excitement. Chloe's father is a real estate mogul. He says this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The market is about to boom. If you could just get the down payment, the mortgage would practically pay for itself in equity. I was a carpenter's wife, not a real estate mogul's. I knew wood and nails, not equity and booms. But I also knew the sound of desperation in my grandson's voice, a desperation to please this new, influential woman in his life. For weeks, he and Chloe worked on me. She would get on the phone, her voice like honey and silk. Oh, Margaret, you are just the most supportive grandmother. Daniel tells me everything you've done for him. This condo isn't just for us, it's for your future too. A real asset in your name. An asset in my name. The phrase stuck with me. Robert's voice echoed in my mind. Anything worth having, Marge, is built with honest work and a true heart. This felt different. It felt rushed, slick. But Daniel's calls became more frantic. He was miserable in his old apartment, he said. He was losing status, losing opportunities. He was losing Chloe. Finally, worn down and terrified of breaking the one remaining link to my daughter, I relented. I drained the last of the savings, took out a final, larger loan against my house, and scraped together the massive down payment. I flew to the city, a city that felt alien and overwhelming, and signed a mountain of paperwork. The real estate agent, a man with a plastic smile recommended by Chloe's father, rushed me through the documents. But as I held the pen over the final signature line on the deed, a strange instinct took over. A flicker of Robert's quiet caution. I'd like the deed to be solely in my name, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. The agent paused. Well, that's unusual. Typically for financing, I am providing 100% of the funds, I cut in. It will be in my name, Margaret Gray. That is my condition. Chloe, who was there, her smile tightening ever so slightly at the corners, quickly recovered. Of course, Margaret! What a brilliant idea! A smart, independent woman securing her assets. I admire that. I signed the papers. I owned a luxury condo I would likely never sleep in a city I didn't know. I had secured the asset. But as I flew home, a cold dread settled in my stomach. I had kept Robert's promise to give Daniel a future, but I had a sinking feeling I had just purchased a future I would have no part in. The phone calls became less frequent after that. He was settling in, he was swamped with studies, he was networking. I told myself it was normal. I had given him wings, and now he was learning to fly. I couldn't expect him to stay in the nest. But the boy who called me every Sunday without fail was gone. In his place was a man whose voice was always slightly distracted, always in a hurry. The money continued to flow. I set up an allowance for him on a credit card, in my name, but for his use, to cover his expenses. I assumed it was for groceries, books, the occasional dinner out. I never checked the statements. Trust was the currency of my love, and I had invested it all in him. It wasn't until the silence of graduation day that I was forced to face the reality of my bankruptcy, a bankruptcy not of money, but of the heart. That night, after Daniel had hung up on me, I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. I walked to the mantelpiece and picked up the photo of the smiling, gap-toothed boy. I looked into his eyes, searching for the grandson I knew, the piece of my Eleanor, the legacy of my Robert. But I couldn't find him. He was lost in a skyline of glistening skyscrapers, in the reflection of a champagne glass, in the arms of a woman named Chloe. The pain in my chest was still there, a dull, heavy ache, but it was no longer the pain of a victim. It was the slow, burning fire of a promise betrayed. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was far from over. Hours later, long after the moon had risen, my phone buzzed on the stand. A notification sound I didn't recognize. I picked it up. A new voicemail. My heart gave a foolish leap of hope. Had he called back to apologize? I pressed the play button, holding my breath. But it wasn't his voice speaking to me. It was his voice speaking to someone else, tinny and distant, clearly a pocket dial. There was the clinking of glasses and background laughter. "Yeah, man, it was a close call," Daniel was saying. I could hear the smirk in his voice. Chloe was right. It's for the best that my grandmother didn't come. I love her, but she's just so old-fashioned, so embarrassing, trying to explain her to Chloe's parents. Her man just, you know. Another voice laughed. "Yeah, I get it." Dodged a bullet. The message ended with a click. I stood in the darkness, the phone still pressed to my ear. Embarrassing. The word hung in the silent room, sharp and venomous. It wasn't just that he had excluded me. It was that he was relieved. He had looked at 40 years of my unconditional love, at the sum of his grandfather's life work, and had summed it all up in one soul-crushing word: embarrassing. The fire in my chest was no longer a slow burn. It was an inferno. The woman who had sacrificed everything was gone, and in her place was someone Robert would have been proud of. A woman who understood that sometimes the only way to protect what you've built with an honest heart is to fight for it with everything you have. My first act of war was quiet. The next morning I went online, a skill I had forced myself to learn to keep up with his university applications, and for the first time I opened the credit card statements. My hands shook as I scrolled through pages and pages of expenses. Thousands of dollars at designer boutiques I'd never heard of. Valentino, Gucci, Cartier. Hundreds of dollars for single meals at restaurants with French names. $5,000 for a pair of earrings from a shop called Chloe's Diamonds. A sickeningly transparent purchase. The allowance meant for books and food had been funding a lifestyle of unimaginable luxury, a lifestyle for her. As I stared at the staggering total, a new email pinged in my inbox. The subject line was just 2 letters, JV. My finger hovered over the delete button, assuming it was junk mail, but something made me open it. The message was short, and it changed everything. Mrs. Gray, I believe we have a mutual acquaintance. The woman your grandson knows as Chloe is not who she says she is. Her real name is Sarah Jenkins, and she is a professional. She ruined my life. I have proof. If you want to get your grandson back and your money, perhaps we can help each other. JV. The world, which had been spinning out of control, suddenly snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. This wasn't just about a thankless grandson and his gold-digging girlfriend. I was standing on the edge of a much darker, much more dangerous world, and this email was either a lifeline or the first step into a trap I could never escape. I looked at the picture of Robert on the mantelpiece. His steady, kind eyes seemed to meet mine. I knew what he would have said. Fight, Marge. Fight for what's yours. I took a deep breath and began to type my reply. The meeting with Julian Vance, the mysterious JV, took place 2 days later in a nondescript diner 60 miles from my home. He had insisted on a neutral location, a place where no one would know either of us. He was a man in his late 30s, with tired eyes that held the ghosts of a recent trauma. He had been handsome once, I could tell, but now his face was etched with the lines of stress and loss. He clutched a worn leather briefcase as if it contained the last remnants of his life. She took everything, he said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. He didn't need to say her name. We were engaged. I had a successful tech startup. Sarah, convinced me to liquidate my assets, to put everything into a joint investment fund managed by her father. There was no fund. There was no father. One morning I woke up, and she was gone. So was the money. All of it. He slid a file across the table. It was filled with documents, photos, bank statements. It was a meticulous chronicle of his own destruction. There was a picture of him and Sarah, looking happy, in love. The woman in the photo was undeniably Chloe. She targets the sons of wealthy or asset-rich families, Julian explained. Usually ones with a single, older guardian they can isolate. She plays the part of the perfect, sophisticated partner, drives a wedge between the target and their family, and then convinces them to consolidate assets. Once she has control, she vanishes. My grandson doesn't have assets, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I do. Exactly, Julian said, his sad eyes meeting mine. You are the mark. Daniel is just the tool. His words confirmed the cold dread that had been growing inside me. This was a professional operation. Daniel was not just being ungrateful, he was a pawn in a cruel and calculated game, and he was leading a predator right to my door, to the very last of what Robert and I had built. What do you want from me? I asked. Justice, he said simply. She's slippery. She covers her tracks. But she made one mistake with me. She got greedy and used a fake passport that I can trace. And with you, she has an anchor, a physical asset she can't just wire to an offshore account overnight. The luxury condo. The condo is in my name, I said, the memory of that small act of defiance suddenly feeling like a fortress wall. A flicker of something, respect, perhaps hope, appeared in Julian's eyes. That's our weapon, he said. That's how we trap her. She thinks she has your grandson wrapped around her finger. She thinks she has you pegged as a frail, out-of-touch old woman who can be easily manipulated. We are going to use that to our advantage. And so, in that greasy spoon diner, over cups of bitter coffee, an unlikely alliance was formed. A heartbroken old woman and a ruined young man, united by a common enemy. The plan we hatched was audacious, risky, and depended entirely on me becoming an actress worthy of the stage. The first step was to create a crisis, a fire that would force Sarah Jenkins to show her hand. That evening, I made the most difficult phone call of my life. I practiced in the mirror, forcing my voice to tremble, my breath to catch in panicked sobs. When I finally dialed Daniel's number, I was ready. "Daniel?" I cried, injecting a theatrical terror into my voice. "Oh, Daniel, something terrible has happened." "Graham, what's wrong? You sound awful," he said, a flicker of what sounded like genuine concern in his voice. "The bank, Daniel. There's been some kind of fraud, a security breach. They've frozen everything, all my accounts, the credit cards. Everything is locked. The man on the phone he said we could lose it all." I let out a loud, shuddering sob. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the panic setting in. His allowance, his lavish lifestyle, his future with Chloe. It was all tied to those accounts. "What do you mean, lose everything?" he finally stammered. "The house, the condo. They said everything connected to the accounts is at risk until they sort it out. It could take months." This was the bait, the condo, the one tangible asset they thought was within their grasp. "Oh my God," he breathed. I heard a muffled voice in the background. It was her, Sarah. "Let me talk to her," she was whispering urgently. Then Daniel's voice came back on the line, no longer concerned but sharp, controlled. "Graham, stay calm," he said, his tone now a perfect echo of hers. "Don't talk to anyone, don't do anything. Chloe has a plan. We'll handle this." I hung up the phone, my heart pounding not with fear, but with a cold, thrilling adrenaline. The trap was set. The predator was circling, believing she was closing in for the kill. She had no idea she was the one being hunted. Julian's intel was perfect. Within 24 hours, the trap was sprung. Daniel called me back. "Graham, Chloe spoke to her father's financial advisor. He says the situation is bad, but there's a way to protect the most valuable things. The art, the furniture, and the condo, it's all high-end. If we sell it privately, we can get cash for it before the bank seizes it as an asset." "Sell it?" I asked, feigning confusion. "But it's all brand new." "It's the only way, Graham," he insisted. "It's to protect you. We'll keep the money safe for you until this is all over. Chloe knows a private art dealer, very discreet. He can arrange a special auction for a few select collectors. It will all be handled quietly. You don't have to do anything. Just trust us. Trust us." The irony was a bitter pill. Julian had already put the next phase of the plan into motion. He had used his remaining contacts in the city to create a ghost identity. The very discreet art dealer Chloe thought she was contacting was, in fact, Julian himself, operating through an untraceable email address and a burner phone. "The auction is set," Julian told me over our next clandestine call. "A week from tonight, in a private gallery downtown. They've fallen for it hook, line, and sinker. They're sending me an inventory of every item in your apartment they plan to sell." He was right. An email arrived the next day from Daniel, detailing everything from the Italian leather sofa to the abstract paintings on the walls, and at the top of the list, a piece that made my heart ache, a small, beautiful landscape painting, River at Dusk. Robert had bought it for me on our 40th anniversary. It was the most expensive thing we had ever owned, and it had hung over our fireplace for years. I had moved it to the condo to give the place a touch of home, a touch of us. Now they were selling it off like common furniture. The stage for the final act was a small, elegant art gallery in a quiet part of the city. Julian had rented it for the night. The select collectors he had invited were a motley crew of justice seekers. There were 2 other young men Sarah Jenkins had defrauded, their faces grim with resolve. There was Julian's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Albright. And, posing as a wealthy European couple, were 2 plainclothes police detectives Sergeant Miller had assigned to the case, after Julian presented him with the preliminary evidence against Sarah. My role was simple. I was to wait in the back office until Julian gave me the signal. I watched on a small security monitor as Daniel and Chloe, or Sarah, arrived. They looked like royalty. He, in another one of his expensive suits, and she, draped in a shimmering silver gown, dripping with the jewelry I had paid for. They surveyed the room with an air of triumph, greeting the fake collectors, completely unaware that they were walking into the final scene of their own downfall. Julian, in his disguise as the slick art dealer Mr. Devereaux, greeted them with a professional smile. "The centerpiece of the evening, of course," Julian announced to the small crowd, his voice smooth as velvet, "is this magnificent landscape, River at Dusk." An attendant placed Robert's painting on an easel under a spotlight. Sarah's eyes gleamed with greed. "We can start the bidding at $50,000, Julian said. A detective, posing as the European collector, raised his paddle. 75. Another of Sarah's victims countered, 100,000. Sarah squeezed Daniel's arm in excitement. The trap was working perfectly. Too perfectly. 125,000 going once. Julian's voice boomed. That was my cue. I walked from the back office, my simple navy blue dress a stark contrast to the glamour in the room. I stepped onto the small stage next to the painting, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Thank you all for your interest in this beautiful painting," I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone Julian had placed for me. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to me. Daniel and Sarah froze, their triumphant smiles dissolving into masks of pure shock. "It has great sentimental value. My late husband, Robert, gave it to me on our 40th anniversary." I turned my gaze directly to my grandson. His face had gone pale, a ghastly white. Sarah's eyes darted towards the exits like a cornered animal. "And I would especially like to thank my grandson, Daniel," I continued, my voice ringing with cold, hard clarity, "for going to the trouble of stealing it from my apartment and bringing it here tonight so it could be returned to me." The room erupted in chaos. As if on cue, Julian stepped forward. "This woman," he said, pointing a finger at a stunned Sarah, "is not Chloe. Her name is Sarah Jenkins, and she is a con artist who has defrauded every single person in this room, including my clients." The detectives moved in, flanking a now hysterical Sarah. Miss Albright, the lawyer, stepped toward a paralyzed Daniel and handed him a set of documents. "Mr. Gray," she said, her voice crisp and professional, "these are the charges. Grand larceny, conspiracy to commit fraud, and elder abuse. I suggest you find a very good lawyer." Daniel looked at me then, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrific understanding. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified, pleading look of the little boy I once knew. But the gap-toothed, smiling child was gone forever. He had made his choice when he called me embarrassing, when he plotted to sell his grandfather's memory for cash, and now he had to live with the consequences. As the police led Sarah away in handcuffs, I walked over to Robert's painting. I gently ran my fingers over the familiar brushstrokes. The road to justice had been long and painful, but Robert's last promise had finally been fulfilled in a way neither of us could have ever imagined. I had given Daniel a future, all right? A future where he would finally learn the value of a true heart and honest work. The legal fallout was messy, but swift. Sarah Jenkins, with her long list of victims and the overwhelming evidence presented by Julian and his lawyer, was denied bail. She faced a mountain of charges across several states and would spend many years behind bars. For Daniel, the path was different. Faced with the undeniable proof of his complicity, the emails, the recorded calls, the testimony of the officers at the auction, he crumbled. His defense was that he had been manipulated, that he was blinded by love for Chloe. and to a certain extent that was true. But as the prosecutor pointed out, he was also blinded by greed. He had willingly participated in a plan to defraud his own grandmother. He had stolen from me, lied to me, and abandoned me when he thought I was most vulnerable. He was a victim, yes, but he was also a perpetrator. I was faced with a choice. I could press charges, send my own grandson, the last piece of my daughter, to prison, or I could show him a mercy he had not shown me. I chose the latter, but with strict conditions. He pleaded guilty to lesser charges. His sentence was 5 years of probation, 2,000 hours of community service, and mandatory psychological counseling. He was also legally required to pay back every single dollar he had helped Sarah steal, a debt that would take him years of honest work to repay. He had to drop out of the prestigious university. The life he had so desperately wanted, the life of influence and ease, was gone. The luxury condo, the scene of the crime, was sold. The art and furniture were returned to me. I stood in the empty, sterile white apartment one last time before the new owners took possession. It felt like a monument to a terrible mistake, a place devoid of love or warmth. Selling it felt like cleansing a wound. With the proceeds from the sale and the last of the money from the Daniel Fund, I did something Robert would have truly loved. I went back to my hometown and established a foundation in the name of the two people whose memories I had fought so hard to honor, the Robert and Eleanor Gray Legacy Fund. Its purpose was simple: to provide scholarships to bright, hard-working students from modest backgrounds, kids who had big dreams but empty pockets, kids like Robert and I had been. It wouldn't be a blank check. The recipients had to maintain good grades, but they also had to volunteer a few hours a week in the community, helping the elderly, tutoring younger kids. I wanted them to learn what Daniel had forgotten, that a future built on giving back is worth far more than one built on taking. Daniel and I did not speak for a long time. The wound was too deep, the betrayal too profound. He moved into a small rented room on the other side of town and got a job at a construction site, his business degree useless without a recommendation or a reputation. I heard from Mrs. Gable that he was working hard, keeping to himself. About a year after the auction, he showed up at my door. He was thinner, his face weathered from the sun, his hands calloused like his grandfather's had been. He didn't look like the arrogant boy in the tailored suit anymore. He looked like a man who had been humbled by life. He didn't say much. He just handed me a small crumpled envelope. Inside was $50. "It's the first payment," he said, his voice quiet, his eyes fixed on the ground. "It's not much, but it's a start." I didn't invite him in. I just nodded and took the money. The road to forgiveness, I knew, would be a long one. Perhaps we would never get there. But for the first time, I saw a flicker of the boy I once loved, a glimmer of Robert's honest work, and a true heart. My life is quiet now, but it's a different kind of quiet. It's not the silence of loneliness, but the peace of purpose. I spend my days managing the fund, reading applications from hopeful young students, and tending to the garden Robert planted. Sometimes I sit on the porch in our old floral armchair, the one I waited in on that terrible graduation day. I think about the promise I made to Robert. I had twisted and turned and nearly broken it, but in the end, I had kept it. I had given our boy a future. Not the one of glittering parties and easy money, but a much more valuable one. A future where he had the chance to rebuild himself from the ground up, to find his own way home. And so, my own ashes were reborn. They thought they could take everything from me, but they forgot the most precious thing, my honor and my strength. And you? Have you ever had to face such a great betrayal in your life? Share your story with me in the comments and where you are listening to this video from. Knowing that there are brave souls like you gives me strength. Remember, even at the end of the darkest night, the sun rises again. close your eyes and remember your own strength. See you in the next story.